Welcome back, boxing fans. Welcome to another night of boxing talk. So, we get a lot of news breaking down, so let's talk about it. Obviously, PBC is finally releasing their schedule for 2024. And this is not me being a PBC hater, this is me being a boxing fan. I was just watching Pro Box TV and they're talking about it. Canelo versus Jamal Charlo rumored to be in the works. We know the PBC has a 3-fight deal with Canelo Alvarez. So it wouldn't be surprised that the two fights prior to a Benavidez fight are Charlo, and then Benavidez. The way the PBC works, they're thinking about what fighters available in the PBC can you put in with Canelo Alvarez and do pay-per-views. Obviously, Juan Charlo moving up from 154, the far more impressive of the two Charlos. And now, of course, the older Charlo, who's had a bounce-back fight. So in theory, he doesn't need to go up so much weight. He's had a fight, so he's not inactive. And obviously, he's going to be better after getting back in the ring in that last fight for this fight against Canelo Alvarez. And that may all be true. But the truth is, this is a fight that boxing fans wanted a few years ago. Not right now. Right now, there would be more exciting fights. But at the same time, Canelo Alvarez is in a position where who can he really fight that the haters and boxing people are going to accept? Outside, of course, of going up and fighting one of the two light heavyweights, which we know is not going to happen because Saudi Arabia is in the works to make that fight between Bivol and Beterbiev this June. So those two fights are basically off the table. The Jaime Munguia fight, sure, that potentially could be a great fight. The reality is, though, the Canelo Alvarez haters are being critical of that fight, criticizing it and hating on it. But the truth is, if Jaime Munguia beats John Ryder, he's far more deserving of a fight with Canelo Alvarez than Charlo is at this time. Right? But the problem with that fight is Jaime Munguia is not a PBC fighter. So in all reality, that Jaime Munguia fight is probably going to happen later on in 2024, possibly even early 2025. After Canelo Alvarez finishes his 3-fight deal with the PBC. The thing I notice with a lot of this criticism is not much of the criticism is being directed towards Al Haymon and the PBC, yet they're the ones that are doing what they've always done. Put out pay-per-view fights that boxing fans were not interested in, weren't asking for, weren't excited about. Nobody was excited about Small Charlo going up and fighting Canelo. Nobody's excited about Big Charlo going up to face Canelo. This is not the fight boxing fans were interested in. But to be fair, Canelo does have to fight. He does need to stay busy. He needs to fight opponents that you could actually market in a pay-per-view. Name-wise, recognition-wise, Charlo has that name recognition. So I can understand what the thinking is with Al Haymon and the PBC, but I think the timing is completely fucking off. Completely off. And obviously Canelo's going to get all the criticism and hate and criticism and scrutiny with this fight. And the PBC and Al Haymon will basically be let off the hook. Yet this isn't the first time we've seen them force feed us pay-per-view fights that fucking were garbage and nobody was interested in. It might be a great undercard, right? That may be what they're going to do on that card. They may be feeding us this fight, the name fight, but with really good undercard fights to make this pay-per-view really worthwhile. Kind of like what Saudi Arabia has been doing, right? They've been giving us deep cards with a lot of big-name opponents with good matchups. So it's hard to be critical and overly critical and over scrutinize those cards. And this brings me to the next card, of course, that Pro Box was talking about as well, 11 hours ago. Thurman, Tszyu, headline first PBC card. Let's just listen to a minute of this.
ESPN reporter Mike Cup. People, he's kind of dropped out of the curiosity for a lot of boxing fans and a lot
Paulie
of people. He's
Malignaggi.
not really draw any casuals either because he hasn't really been active. Tim Tszyu, I think, is a potential big star in boxing as time goes by. He's a big star in Australia already. He's got the right last name with his father being a Hall of Famer, but in the U.S. he still hasn't got enough notoriety. I don't know. I would think if you'd want to build him up to a pay-per-view star, you'd probably want to keep moving him in main events on non-pay-per-view fights, where you could kind of build up his star power.
And that's another problem I've had with the PBC. Paulie just told you. If you want to build up somebody's profile to make them a star, you need to put them on free TV to build up their fan base, to showcase them in front of quality opponents, to show their sensational boxing abilities, and allow more people the opportunity to see them before you start locking them into pay-per-view every single fight. Meaning now the people that are going to watch them is going to be minimalized because casual fans are not going to spend money to watch a fight that they don't really care about, aren't invested in, and not really too sure of who the fighters participating are. And that's the whole point with this fight, Tim Tszyu versus Thurman. The WBO has it right because the WBO is not sanctioning it. So Tim Tszyu is literally fighting Thurman for nothing. No world titles on the line, apparently. And it may even be at a catchweight. Who knows the reality behind it. But the truth is, how is this fight fucking a fight that's being made? Right? With Charlo and Canelo, you can understand that. Those two guys have been tied together for a long time. Canelo just signed a 3-fight deal with Al Haymon and the PBC. They need to come up with opponents to sell pay-per-views. Charlo, Benavidez. Right? At the end of the day, if those are the 3 fights that we get from the PBC with Canelo Alvarez, Charlo, Benavidez, people are not going to be that disappointed. They're not going to be that disappointed with that level of opposition for Canelo Alvarez, right? All 3 name opponents, 1 who is a real threat, 2 who, in theory, potentially could have been threats, but we don't know if they really will be. This is better than when Andre Ward signed a 3-fight deal with Kovalev being the main event and 2 fighters that nobody even knew as the build-up fights. These are not build-up fights in a sense. You can understand that these are name brand opponents, right? And the problem with the PBC is they love to recycle name brand opponents. We just saw that recently on an undercard, I think of David Morrell's fight, where you had Guerrero versus Berto. If you remember those names from the days of Floyd Mayweather, that tells you how much they've been recycled. That literally we got that fight. A fight that at that point nobody was fucking contemplating, was thinking about, even cared about. And the final results, who even fucking knows? Who even cares? It's irrelevant. But this is consistently what the PBC delivers. These kind of retread, recycled fights. And that's obviously what they're doing with Charlo, throwing him in with Canelo. That's obviously what they're doing with Thurman, throwing him in with Tim Tszyu. Thurman obviously going up from 147 to 154. Charlo obviously going up from 160 to 168. One of the clear differences, Thurman hasn't had a bounce back fight. He's been inactive for a very long time and hasn't got an opportunity to get back in the ring, get some of the rust off before jumping in with a dangerous opponent like Tim Tszyu. Charlo has had that opportunity, and if he's able to capitalize on the opportunity, you could see this being the perfect opportunity. People sleeping on him, him sliding through and surprising people. People thinking he's going to be like his brother, but potentially he may be better. He may be more dangerous. But the truth is, nobody wants a Charlo Canelo fight at this time. Nobody wants a Thurman versus Tim Tszyu at this time. And I don't know how John Boxing brought Erickson Lubin into this and somehow acted like people are hating on Lubin. Nobody's talking about Lubin. Not because people are hating on Lubin. They're not talking about Lubin because Al Heyman doesn't give a fuck about Lubin. If he did, he would be the one getting the Tim Tszyu fight. But he's not. He'd rather put Keith Thurman, an inactive welterweight, into this fight for pay-per-view than Erickson Lubin. This has nothing to do with boxing fans. And I don't see anybody hating on Lubin because the reality is Lubin versus Tim Tszyu would be a way better fight, right? There would be a lot less hate if Tim Tszyu was fighting Erickson Lubin for his WBO title, because that fight, like Mendoza, would make some sort of sense. I mean, after all, Lubin just bounced back with a victory over, what's his face? I can't remember his name. The other PBC fighter. Didn't look great in the process, but got the win. So he's relevant. He's a top 10 ranked 154-pound fighter. He's been active. So that fight makes sense. I think if you look at the rankings, Erickson Lubin's even ranked by the WBO, unlike Keith Thurman. So there's a lot more reasons to be critical of that fight because it doesn't make any sense at all. With Benavidez and Canelo, most of us feel that that fight was never going to happen until September anyway. So it doesn't really matter who Canelo fights in the meantime, as long as in September, it's Benavidez. If it's not Benavidez at the end of that 3-fight deal with the PBC, then that's a serious fucking issue. And that's going to bring a lot of hate, criticism, and negativity to Canelo, not the PBC. They're going to slide through scot-free and not have to answer questions about the kind of fights they're putting out on pay-per-view or anything, because the people who fanboy for them don't really fucking care. They're just pushing a racial narrative, and that's consistently the only reason they support the PBC, because they think it's black American boxing, even though that's not true. But okay, the owner's black, but so was Don King. Did Don King really care about the black community, or did he care about filling his pockets full of green? Promoters are promoters are promoters, regardless of their skin color, nationality. They care about making profit. That's what their job is. So now we come to this Thurman-Tim Tszyu fight. You know, if this is the kind of fight we can expect from the PBC on Amazon, it's good that I can't watch Amazon in Taiwan. I have Amazon, but for some reason I don't have access to these kind of things on my Amazon account. And I don't know why. I'm going to have to go to my friend's house in Shalu, which is 30 minutes away, 30, 40 minutes away, because his account is registered to the UK and he has access to all of that. So I'm going to have to literally go there if I want to see these fights on Amazon, on clear, pristine, high definition. But, let's look at this card a little more. Because in truth, my first initial thought was, fuck this pay-per-view. Who wants to spend money on this garbage, right? And in truth, if this was the fight, and the only fight, Thurman versus Tszyu, it's not really the fight that I would be very excited about. It's not a pay-per-view I would pull out my credit card to pay for. I wouldn't. But when you look at the undercard, it ain't too bad, in truth. And this is obviously early, and this is just the 4 main fights. And I suppose these would be the 4 fights on the pay-per-view section. It's not bad. But I go back to when Errol Spence signed to fight Mikey Garcia on pay-per-view. Errol Spence's first pay-per-view. They chose to bring up Mikey Garcia 2 weight divisions to fight Errol Spence on his first pay-per-view. In a fight nobody was asking for, nobody cared about. But PBC fans tried to put the spin on it. But non PBC fans, boxing fans, had a real reason to be angry. Because instead of getting two fights that we really wanted, we got one fight nobody fucking cared about. And it turned out exactly how we expected it to. This uninteresting, fucking meaningless, not even a fight worth giving Errol Spence praise for, because it was fucking bullshit to begin with. The fights we wanted and we could have got: Spence versus Crawford. We could have got Spence Crawford back then, and they could have easily ended up doing potentially a trilogy, which for you and me, man, imagine how that would have worked out. Before the car crash, before all the drama, the eye surgeries, and all of this kind of shit affected us, we could have got prime Errol Spence versus prime Bud Crawford. But we didn't get it. And you see how that unfolded, and the narrative and the bullshit we've had to endure over, 5 years of wrong side of the street narrative. And the other fight we could have got would have been a unification fight, potentially undisputed, between Vasily Lomachenko and Mikey Garcia. Those were the two fights we could have got. But we ended up getting Spence versus Mikey Garcia instead. And that's kind of like this right here. We could have got Tim Tszyu against Bud Crawford, right? That's a fight many of us truthfully felt was a real possibility. And if that was the fight that would have been made, nobody would be complaining. Nobody would be pointing fingers at the PBC saying anything negative. They'd be saying, damn, that's a good fight. Tim Tszyu may have bit off far more than he could fucking swallow. And it's great to see Bud Crawford getting back in the ring so quickly against such a legitimate opponent to try to become a 4-weight world champion, equaling what Inouye has done. That would have been dynamite. But we didn't get that. And then, of course, there's the Erickson-Lubin fight. A better fight than Keith Thurman. A legitimate top 10, 154-pound fighter. Dangerous. A bit chinny, but still a dangerous fighter. That would have been a better fight. I don't know if it's a pay-per-view fight, but it's a better fight. Now we get Keith Thurman versus Tim Tszyu. Garbage. But when you look at the undercard, again, it's similar to that Spence Crawford situation with Mikey Garcia and Lomachenko. Here you got Rolando Romero, the WBA 140-pound champion, facing Isaac Cruz, a 135-pound contender, who's in prime position to get a Tank Davis rematch as the number one mandatory for Tank Davis's WBA title. As far as them stylistically, Cruz, Romero could be a great fight. Could truthfully turn out to be a dynamite matchup. But think about the scenario that we could have got. Because that's what this whole fight card is about. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Right? Coulda, woulda, shoulda. We could have got these fights. We would have loved it. We would have praised PBC for making these fights. We should have got those fights. But unfortunately, we're not getting those fights. And that's where a lot of the criticism comes from. People will make this into a race thing, but if you listen to the words coming out of my mouth, you'll realize it has nothing to do with race. It has to do everything with boxing and creating and giving boxing fans content that they truly want. Not that you want to force feed us, jam down our throats and act like we're fucking geese and you're trying to fatten up our livers. No. We're fucking adults. We know what we want. We don't need to be forced to eat something that fucking we don't want. I'm drinking a coffee because I bought it. I wanted it. I'm choosing to drink it. Yum. So, Rolly Romero, Isaac Cruz. As I say, it's not a bad fight, and it could turn out to be a potential fight of the year, kind of like the Jaime Munguia John Ryder fight that's happening this weekend. But the problem with this fight is you have a WBA champion facing a 135-pound contender coming up to get a world title fight after never fighting at 140. Neither are big names. They're both Tank Davis leftovers. And the fight we could have got, we should have got, should have been Rolly Romero versus Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia and Rolly Romero would have been a real legitimate pay-per-view fight. More so than a Tim Tszyu Keith Thurman. More so than a Rolly Romero Isaac Cruz. There's some star power attached to that fight. It would give Ryan Garcia the opportunity to become a world champion. Thus, building up fights potentially between him and Haney or him and Lopez, right? Which would be superstar fights. You having Rolly Romero fighting Isaac Cruz, it kind of seems like you're trying to fatten up the winner for a rematch with Tank Davis to become a 3-weight world champion. Legitimate. And if that's the direction the PBC is moving, that's disappointing. Because nobody wants to see Tank Davis rematch against either one of these two guys. Even if it is for a significant belt to give him some legitimacy. That's not the fight boxing fans want. And once again, it's a situation where we woulda, we coulda, and we shoulda, but we're not. We're not getting what we want. It's like, I'm sure we've all felt this way. You've asked for something for Christmas. You got a box. It felt like it was going to be what you wanted. You opened it, and it was similar, but not fucking quite. Right? I wanted that great work vest, but then I'm getting some cheap, knockoff, crappy looking, shitty version. But you had to smile and pretend, man, this is exactly what I wanted, and never fucking wear it. Or you wanted those work boots with the steel toes that obviously became trendy when I was in grade 6, grade 7, and grade 8, right? And you'd have the toe flaps hanging over, and you know, these are what real construction dudes were wearing, but it looked fucking good, great with jeans, they look pimped out. And then you get like a refugee version that just looks cheap and shit, right? And that's what this is. It looks like you're trying to give us what we want, but when it all speaks and comes out, it just isn't. And this comes to the next fight. Erislandy Lara versus Michael Zarafa. I mean, if this was going to be Lara versus fucking Danny Garcia, at least you'd have more name recognition with it. On this card, with Thurman, Tszyu, Romero, Cruz, Lara, Danny Garcia, you at least are pushing the name recognition of old refugee name brand fighters. But now you're having him fight Michael Zarafa. So you got 2 Australians on the card. That's good. But the reality is, I'd rather see Tim Tszyu fight Michael Zarafa. That would be a more intriguing fight than watching Erislandy Lara fight Michael Zarafa. You know, you fight Zarafa, Tszyu in Australia. That fight makes a lot of sense. Lara, no one cares about Lara right now. Lara is old, shot, and finished. Right here, he's suspended by New York State Athletic Commission indefinitely. Indefinitely. But yet, he's scheduled for this fight. Indefinitely. This is a guy who's 29, 3-3, never been stopped, 17 KOs. Obviously, one of the slickest fucking fighters of this era. A fighter that was very difficult. You know, currently now, how old is he? God only knows. He's Cuban, so he's probably 8 to 48 years old. 5'9", 75-inch reach, right? He would have been a great opponent for Floyd Mayweather back in the day to defend his 154-pound title. But of course, Floyd didn't want that smoke. Is this a fight that's even relevant? I mean, I know he's got a belt, so you might as well make the fight. Zarafa is mandatory. But you might as well have made fucking Lara versus Carlos Adames. That fight would have been sensational, would have grabbed tons of people's attention, and would have been a far more intriguing matchup. But you didn't. Again. And then, of course, you have the final fight, which is a good fight. Two dangerous, young 154-pounders, the winner of whom could potentially be a Tim Tszyu opponent. You can see that's the thinking behind this, right? The winner of this is a perfect opponent to put into a Tim Tszyu fight moving forward. Both are susceptible to KO losses, but yet both are super exciting, hard-punching, come-forward, aggressive fighters. Sebastian Funduro, right? A very intriguing fighter. And then, of course, Sergey Bolchak, Eastern European fighter with a lot of power. Here he is here. 23-1, 23 knockouts. 100% KO ratio of opponents he's faced. The problem is the 28-year-old Ukrainian looks like his chin is vulnerable. When he stepped up and faced Brandon Adams, who was a good, serviceable fighter, at the time was 22-3, ended up getting stopped in 8 rounds. Since then, he's bounced back, and the best fighter he's faced in that time is an older, mashed-up version of Nathaniel Gallimore, 22-6-1, who he stopped in 6 rounds. Now he's going to step in to face Sebastian Funduro, right? A fighter who is 21-1, 13 knockouts, a guy that obviously got tons of praise when he beat Erickson Lubin, stopping him in 9 rounds in a war. Ended up facing Carlos Ocampo, beat him over 12 rounds, and then faced Brian Mendoza and got knocked out in 7. Now he's going to be facing Bolchak. So that fight could be another fight of the year, right? As far as the matchup's great, solid. Kind of like Romero versus Cruz. Zarafa and Lara, I don't know. Who even knows what Lara is like at this point? He hasn't been in a real fight in years now. And as far as the main event, it's a fight where Tim Tszyu could knock out Keith Thurman inside 3 rounds with a huge body shot. Or Keith Thurman could go out there, box, move, and try to survive and go through a boring 12-round fight and lose on the cards in a fight that doesn't help anybody, right? That's the problem with this card and the other card. They're not fights that anybody really gives a fuck about. And people will say, oh, this is anti-PBC narrative. No, because when the PBC was putting out great fights last year in 2023, it's amazing how I was praising the PBC. But yeah, when they put out these same old refugee type of fucking cards, that you expect me to embrace them. Whereas I wouldn't embrace this regardless of who was putting this on. I'm often very critical of Matchroom's cards of unknown UK fighters that no one gives a fuck about in the States. No one. No one cares about any of those fighters. No one knows who they are. Right? I often do praise ESPN because even when they don't have the best main events, they have deep cards with a lot of upcoming young stars. And I can appreciate what they're doing. In this case, I told you, initially when I saw this card, I was very disappointed. I thought, there's no way I'd fucking spend any money to watch this card. But when I see the undercard with Rolly Romero and Isaac Cruz, I think that fight could very well be worthwhile. And then, of course, I see some Funduro versus Bolchak fight, and I think that fight also could really be worthwhile. And then you have the other 2 fights as well. So overall, it's not a bad card. Is it a real pay-per-view worthy card? Questionable. At a reasonable price, okay. At $80, no way. Now, if Lara was fighting Carlos Adames for a unification fight, great. If Thurman wasn't on this card and Tim Tszyu was fighting Bud Crawford, fucking super great. If he was fighting Erickson Lubin, good, totally solid. With the undercard, nobody could complain. Really, nobody could complain. But, let me know what you think about this card overall and about the possible fight between Canelo versus Charlo. As I say, I'm not defending Canelo, but I think if this is what the PBC consistently does, then people might want to point this out and focus on the fact that this probably has more to do with the PBC than it does with Canelo Alvarez. Right? And maybe some of the blame needs to be spread fairly.
Because I think Tim Tszyu has the kind of star power ability if you know how to move it right. I don't think this is the way. I don't think people are going to pay money out of their pocket for a guy that they haven't really heard about or don't know about yet. He is good, but it just, I just don't think it's a pay-per-view. Thurman, the co-main event with Romero and Cruz, again, a solid fight. But again, is this something that goes on pay-per-view? Lara and Zarafa, again, pretty good fight, but is this really something that needed to be on pay-per-view? This could easily have been a regular Prime card. You start everything out with a bang on regular Prime.
And that's what a lot of people have been saying. For Prime, and I even heard that Prime wanted their first fight to be free, right? That's what they wanted. So if that's what they wanted, and they don't have any superstar on the fight, then why isn't it free for Amazon subscribers? To give them a little taste of what the PBC has coming for them in 2024. For me, that would make far more sense. But then again, what can I say? It is what it is. But leave your comments below. How would you have preferred this card to have shaped up? Let me know in the comment section below. With the possibility of Canelo Charlo, if he fights David Benavidez in September, does that validate this fight? And if he doesn't fight David Benavidez in September, then who really is to blame? Canelo, Al Haymon, Canelo, and Al Haymon. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Remember, every week at this time, we're going to be releasing fight preview shows. So jump in and come listen and come participate. I may go live. I may just do it like today with a taped delivery. But we got boxing this weekend, and we got boxing coming down the PBC pipeline. So let me know what you think about it. Let me know your predictions with regards to Jaime Munguia against John Ryder. I think it potentially could be an unbelievable fight. What do you think about this PBC card? Is there anything on it that makes you excited? Thanks for watching. Peace out, and I'll see you next time.